What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to The Fringe. If you joined me yesterday, we talked a little bit about Mark Carney's lies and what he's trying to push on to Canadians. But one of the things people are a little confused with is what can and can't Mark Carney do between now and a federal election? Well, I'm here to answer those questions today because Mark Carney, as he sat and tried to look like Donald Trump. He stole from Donald Trump's by trying to look like he was signing an executive order in Canada to reduce the carbon tax to zero. We know he's stolen from Pierre Poilievre. He's making all of these promises that, quite frankly, he just can't cash in on. And I want to highlight that today. Well, I want to talk about that. I want to head over to the Globe and Mail. This article coming from Tristan Hopper. Now, Tristan Hopper, great journalist. I know Tristan very well. In fact, Tristan is responsible, almost in part, by causing How the Prime Minister Stole Freedom, our first best-selling book about Justin Trudeau, to go viral as the National Post. Sorry, I said Globe and Mail. As the National Post put out an article through Tristan Hopper about the book itself. So shout out to Tristan Hopper. Here's his article on First Reading, which again is a great series that he puts out. I would highly recommend following Tristan on these. Mark Carney's not really supposed to be doing anything. Well, what does that mean? Well, let's take a look. Mark Carney may now be Canada's 24th replacement for Justin Trudeau, but the unique circumstances of his appointment mean that he technically shouldn't be allowed to do anything. No appointments, no new spending or taxes, no foreign policy commitments, nothing at all that isn't routine, non-controversial, or reversible. It's all part of the Caretaker Convention, a long-standing parliamentary tradition which holds that until a prime minister is able to command the confidence of the House of Commons, he's not allowed to wield the full power of his office. That's very important as we move forward into a next federal election. When you watch the behaviors, I wanted to point out the Caretaker Convention because I'm not sure if a lot of people are up to speed on that one. So essentially, Mark Carney is just there to look good as a replacement until we hold a federal election and the Canadians give him a mandate, just as Pierre Poilievre has pointed out, just as many have pointed out. It says here, in fact, he's not supposed to do almost any of the things Canada typically associates with their prime minister. Quote, avoid practicing in high-profile government-related domestic and international events, reads an official Privy Council guide to the Caretaker Convention. It adds that this includes international visits and the signing of treaties and agreements. So kind of like Mark Carney just jumping on his jet and going over to the EU to meet with King Charles, right? He shouldn't have done that. He shouldn't have gone over there, but he did because he has a raw sense of entitlement. He thinks Canadians are stupid. Caretaker prime ministers are also asked to steer clear of appointments, policy, decisions, new spending, negotiations or consultations, non-routine contracts, and grants and contributions. Wow. Sounds a little sketchy for Mark Carney. I don't know if he's going to follow the rules. I mean, he won't disclose his assets. I sure don't see him following any of these rules before we see a federal election. It says here that the only real exception to this is anything that could be deemed urgent and in the public interest. So again, this is where I've said that they want the incoming trade war with Donald Trump. They want to push this because it's the only trump card, no pun intended, that they have to convincing the Canadians that Mark Carney needs these powers. The good news coming out of this is that when Mark Carney campaigned during his leadership role or leadership run, that he would use emergency powers to try and do everything necessary to protect Canadians. When they talk about UBI, when they talk about the stimulus going into the economy, everything else, Mark Carney can't do any of these things unless given a mandate by Canadians. It says, but in his first hours as prime minister, Carney is already acting beyond the limits of a caretaker. Shortly after his swearing in, he signed an order to get rid of the consumer carbon tax. Next week, which has already happened, he's planning to travel to the UK and France on official business. When asked by a reporter when he would be convening the House of Commons, he brushed it off. The news today is behind me, an exceptional group of individuals who are serving Canada. We will be going to take some decisions which directly meet some of the objectives I set out in my remarks, he said. That's the news for today. So I'm not going to answer the question directly. I'm just going to give you a bunch of word salad and hope that you're too stupid to understand what I'm actually doing. It says here the caretaker convention usually clicks in during election campaigns as soon as writs are dropped and a parliament is dissolved. The idea is that the sitting prime minister has lost the confidence of the House and should conduct himself with appropriate reserve. Given the government cannot assume that it will command the confidence of the House after an election, it is incumbent upon a government to act with restraint during an election period, reads the official caretaker convention guide. But it's arguable that the caretaker convention applies just as equally to Carney, given that he hasn't received Parliament's official blessing as the new Prime Minister of Canada. Again, very important to point that out. This is where people got to watch and be diligent over the next months. It says here, unlike, say, the U.S. presidency, the office of Prime Minister is not a directly elected position. The position isn't even mentioned in the British North America Act, Canada's founding constitution. Instead, it refers only to the executive powers of the Governor-General, who acts on the advice of the Privy Council. Only in practice did this become a system in which the Governor-General defers to the executive decisions of the Prime Minister, provided the Prime Minister has the legitimacy to govern, which Mark Carney does not. One of the only times a Governor-General ever slapped down a Prime Minister, in fact, was over charges that the Prime Minister was attempting to govern without the confidence of the House. When Charles Tupper lost an election to Liberal leader Wilfrid Laurier in 1896, he refused to cede power or convene Parliament and was ultimately forced to resign by Governor-General Lord Aberdeen after attempting to push through some patronage appointments. Carney isn't the first non-MP to be sworn in as Canadian replacement, but he is the first without any parliamentary experience whatsoever. Contrary to popular belief, the Prime Minister doesn't have to be a parliamentarian or even a Canadian citizen. That right there should tell you a lot. Doesn't that mean we need to change our laws? Isn't this again where we should be demanding a little bit of change from incoming parties to at least question, shouldn't this be addressed? Shouldn't you have to be a Canadian citizen in order to govern the country of Canada in its top job? I mean, you have to be born in the United States in order to be a president. It's anyone who can command the confidence of the House of Commons, it says, that can be Prime Minister. No such vote can occur until Parliament is recalled. The last confidence vote was more than 3 months ago on December 9th, when Carney was still just a financier with a side gig as Trudeau's advisor. The particular vote ended 180 to 152 in the Liberals' favor, but the vote was to express confidence in the Prime Minister, who at the time was still Justin Trudeau. In a recent write-up from The Hub, former Conservative staffer Howard Anglin argued that until Carney met the House and secured its confidence, the Governor-General should ignore him if he tries to do anything beyond the basics. I would agree with that statement. It says here, if Carney tries to execute any orders in council inconsistent with the caretaker convention, the Governor-General should quietly leave them unsigned in her inbox until the government has secured Parliament's support, he wrote. Now again, they could get Parliament support with Jagmeet Singh. They probably will. And the Governor-General, in all fairness, will not ignore these requests, because the Governor-General has shown she's just as corrupt as the Liberals. Carleton University Westminster expert Philip Lagacé agreed, telling the National Post, "This is a new ministry and it's not evident that it will hold confidence, so caretakers should apply until there is a confidence vote." But Lagasse deferred with Anglin on the details of how Carney might be reneged in if he tries to exceed his brief. It usually ends up to the clerk of the Privy Council to tell a Prime Minister they can't do something rather than the Governor-General, Lagasse said. Like a lot of checks and power, the Canadian system, the caretaker convention is ultimately mostly voluntary. So again, not written law. It depends on the willingness of the PM to act with restraint, said Lagasse. And again, or Lagacé, I'm sorry. This is where we run into a big conflict of interest when it comes to our politics. Well, these are just guidelines. They're not really rules, right? If Mark Carney doesn't act within these interests, which again, he hasn't already, then this should be a strike against him when he goes to the polls. These are the things I'm saying from the get-go, that if Pierre Poilievre wants to pivot, he should be focusing on. He should be bringing these things up to Canadians, that he's just like Justin. He's not following the rules. He didn't enact the caretaker convention. So why would you trust him running your country? If he's not even going to follow the rules from the second he gets into office, what do you think the next 4 years would look like? Mark Carney faces a simple choice: have Parliament summoned. Sorry, I skipped one. University of Waterloo constitutional scholar Emmett McFarlane wrote in an email to the Post that says there's no hard legal restrictions on what Carney can do. However, whether or not the caretaker convention applies, it's down to a question of democratic norms. I wanted to make sure we highlighted that before I moved on. Mark Carney faces a simple choice: have Parliament summoned, introduce a new speech from the throne, and command the confidence of the House, or request the dissolution of Parliament to call an election, said University of Waterloo constitutional scholar Emmett McFarlane in an email to the National Post. So essentially, there's rumor going around that an election will be called. Now, again, when Mark Carney was questioned about it, him and his liberal cohorts did nothing more than sneer and laugh and say, well, we'll go to the polls before November. Now, what is important to note is that by understanding the caretaker convention, there's going to be a lot of distractions coming out in the upcoming weeks, possible months, depending on how long Mark Carney wants to delay. If he calls an election right away, be wary of the distractions that are coming from the Liberals. Again, try to educate anyone who tries to vote or support this party at any point. Not to say that you should sabotage an election, but essentially point out the flaws in which Mark Carney has not followed the suggested, and I'm not going to say rule of law, but the constitutional guidelines that are in place for a caretaker who is not Prime Minister of Canada, which he has clearly ignored, and why it's dangerous to give people who have no respect for rules positions of power. Let me know what you guys think down below. Again, big shout out to Mrs. Fringe for pointing this article this way. Again, shout out to Tristan Hopper as well. Very well put together article. Again, educating Canadians on some of the conventions that some are not aware even exist. So thank you to both of them for that great article. Let me know what you guys think down below. Should the caretaker convention be put through as law? Should it at least be more than a guideline? Do you believe you should be born in Canada in order to run as Prime Minister of Canada? Let me know your thoughts down below. If it's your first time here, I hope this video has earned your subscription. Make sure as you hit that button, join our large Fringe majority here on the channel, hit your bell for notifications, join me live here on the channel for some surprise live streams, but also for our scheduled live stream weekly Friday nights for Friday Night Fringe, where I'm joined by my beautiful wife, Mrs. Fringe, as we go over everything that happened this week in politics, everything that's coming up in the week ahead, as well as back and forth within the greatest YouTube community on the platform. I look forward to chatting with you guys in those live streams to hear what you have to say, and both myself and Mrs. Fringe look forward to hearing what you have to say this Friday, starting at 6 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Central, here on the channel. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you have a great rest of your day. I'll catch you on the next one.